Yes. Anything? Oh, sorry. In one context, and it's imposter syndrome, which was brought to my attention by Dr. Kelly Lee, who is a colleague of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I can see her mind. So what is, ooh. Sorry, did it change?
No, it hasn't changed yet, Esther.
Okay, so what is imposter syndrome?
Mm-hmm.
It's also called imposter phenomenon, sometimes referred to as. And it's a belief held by usually high achievers that they are somehow a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like my achievements are not something, they can't internalize it, and they will attribute their success to things like luck or error or even hard work. And the hard work part might feel a little weird, like what's that all about? But they think like, I have to work twice as hard to get half as far, something like that. Oh, and I just realized my name is appearing as Patrick, but anyways. Okay, and then they have a deep fear of being exposed as a fraud. So they might feel like an outside, okay, do I have a right to be here? Okay, so they will question their right to be there. And so when does it occur, who goes through the imposter syndrome? And I read a bunch of papers, and I've seen from like 30% to even 86%, but about 70% of people have felt like imposters for at least some part of their careers. And I think the reason why this resonated with me when Kelly shared about this is because I have felt like an imposter before. And imposter feelings can be especially prevalent when people take on new roles or new challenges. And who do we know that in a few weeks are going to take on a new role and new challenges? Or student teachers. And I'm not saying they're all going to feel like imposters, but it's it can happen. And additionally, I want to point out some things that I saw that were interesting to me. First generation students, college students experience imposter phenomenon more often and at higher levels than other students. And then I read this interesting study of medical students that found that Black, Latinx, Native American, and multiracial students had more than they were more than two times likely to feel like imposters than Asians and white students. And the researchers or the authors of that paper pointed out that Asians and whites are usually the majority in medical school. But I wanted to point out that in another study of college students in the Southwest, I believe, Asian American students were experiencing imposter feelings at higher rates. And the authors of that paper cited things like it wasn't really research-based. They cited things like, the paper is research-based, but this part, they said maybe it's because of Asian and American students have this like model minority stress, or they have high parental expectations. And I kind of want to challenge that a bit, because as an Asian, that's a little bit offensive to say I feel like an imposter because of my parents' parenting style. So I want to challenge that a bit and stop pointing at like my model minority status for all the plights of Asian American students. So I thought about, oh, sorry, I think I skipped a slide. So why should we care? The imposter phenomenon is strongly tied to depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. And it's an even stronger predictor than minority status stress. So minority status stress comes from experiences of discrimination, whereas the imposter phenomenon actually internalizes those experiences, and where the person feels like, oh, I'm a fraud, I'm not supposed to be here, I don't know how I got here, I don't belong here, nobody here looks like me, nobody here has had the same experiences as I have. So I thought about the ways that a student teacher might show signs that they are feeling like a fraud. And some of our student teachers have a really strong need for validation. And they're hyper focused on things like if the lesson went well or not. Some teachers hesitate to take over or try anything new because they're afraid to fail. And then if they fail, then I'm exposed, I'm a fraud. And then sometimes they're overwhelmed by this anxiety that everything has to be perfect. And so what can we do? I have some ideas. We can discuss experience of microaggression that they have experienced, or you can even share the ones that you had. And could we be perpetuating some of these messages? We can promote, this part is so important. We need to promote student teachers' sense of belonging to the teaching profession and our cohort and the university and their school site, so that they have that sense of belonging. And one paper I wrote about Black students said that students who were involved in Black activism had a lower rate of imposter feelings. And we have to be clear that the goal of observations is not to judge or evaluate, but it's to engage in a learning continuum. And we can grow together. I'm growing too. I don't have all the answers, and I'm growing too with you. So I have some questions here, and we don't have to do this now because I know we have some other panelists, but I think these are some important questions to consider. Like, how can we value our students' teachers' lived experiences? And number two, how can we promote more sense of belonging within our student teachers? Thank you.
Thank you for getting us off to such a great start. Let's hold on to the questions and then direct them to the presenter when we have time at the end. Thank you very much. Who would like to go next of the group?
Okay, so I'm next. My name is Beth Foraker. First off, I just want to be grateful to you, Esther. Thank you for giving me a lot to consider, and I have found exactly what you spoke about to be true. I work at UC Davis in multiple subjects. I'm going to be, so the kind of the overarching theme of our presentation is how to support student teachers, and so I'm just going to share how I take my student teaching notes when I go and observe them. And Johnny has my, so we have a Google Doc of resources, and these samples are in the Google Doc. So I just want to first talk, you can go ahead and put it up, Johnny. The first one is go ahead and put I think it's a literacy lesson. Or this one is fine, we'll do that. Okay, but first, before we get going, I just want to say that for me, when I work with my student teachers, I'm sure this is probably true for all of you, but the relationship with my student teachers, helping them feel exactly what Esther was saying, that they belong, that they matter, that they have value, that it's not an accident that our paths have crossed, that they're meant to teach me something, I'm meant to learn from them, and support them in this growing together. And so what I always say to them is, I'm your biggest fan for this year. I'm dedicated to your success. I'm super excited that we're working together. And I want you to be the best teacher you can be. Because truthfully, I have your students at the center of what I'm thinking about. I'm always going to be thinking about your future students. And they need you to be the best you can be. So that's kind of how I begin with them. So I do want, we at UC Davis always get an autobiography that they share with us. So I read those, I share my autobiography with them, and then try and create some moments to really get to know the student teacher and vice versa. So when I do go observe them for the first time, I use photos in my observation. So I just bring an iPad and I take notes about what this teacher is doing and saying, what the students are doing and saying, and I use photos to support that. Because I have found that students, Matt Wallace yesterday, who's also from our math program, single subject program in Davis, shared having the lens of the student outcome, the student data as being what you focus on in your observation. And if you do that, it becomes less about a personal thing to the teacher and more focus on the students, right? So similarly, I find the photos help to focus on the student. It's also a chance if the student teacher, for instance, in this particular example, the student teacher was going back and forth teaching ELD between Farsi and English, and she was trying to think of the Farsi word for snowflake, and she couldn't think of it. And we were sitting there together, and I had my iPad, so I just got a Google image and put up the image of snowflake, and then the young girls said snowflake in Farsi, and they remembered. So just using, reminding our student teachers that they do have access to technology. This is, of course, prior to COVID, and using technology to support them in the classroom. Talking about, so then let's say there's links that might help them, or ideas that I know about, or resources that I know about, I can also place that right in the notes and in the debrief, return back to that. So I think this was a very short lesson. So there you go on that one. And then my next lesson is, I think it's the sample math lesson, that one. Thanks, Johnny. This is, again, just taking down data and using these photos. If you can scroll down, so here's student work, here's what the teacher is seeing, and then student response, and then some suggestions for what she could do to elicit more response from students or other ideas. And then I think if you can scroll down a little bit more. So at some point there's students are needing more of a brain break. They've been sitting on the carpet for a long time. So talking again, kind of just noting where we can pause, where we can acknowledge students who are getting, might be demonstrating that they need a little brain break. And then putting a brain break, you know, a sample of a brain break with a link right in there helps too. Again, just mostly focusing on the students. And then the other thing I wanted to say about the photos is that the photos can, I think Matt's talked about this yesterday, you know, lots of times our student teachers are so critical of themselves and they only see the mistakes they make. And photos are a good example of the good stuff happening too. And it's a reminder for them that so many good things are happening in those student teaching moments that they might not notice. And it's a chance for you to be a fly on the wall and help them see those, kind of have photo evidence of the good things. And I think that's basically it. Oh, and then will you, Johnny, okay, and the other thing I just want everyone to know, see that universal TPE UDL right there? This is not about student support, but this is an amazing document that takes the TPEs that our students are responsible for and links them directly with UDL considerations. And this has been developed at California state level, and I just want every teacher to know about this. And then at the top it says there's an amazing Padlet on UDL also, so make sure and take advantage of this resource. All right.
Thanks, Beth. I just wanted to chime in and mention that's also, I shared that there's a session on UDL in the next group of presentations, so that resource is also shared in that folder. Thanks for,
Lisa.
yeah.
All right, we have a couple other folks who would like to go next, please.
Hi, I'm Drina Ramirez, and I also am a supervisor with Beth at UC Davis. And my little similar to Beth, I'm also sharing an idea that I have used with my students this last year. This is my 5th year, and you know, you as a supervisor, you also are growing and figuring out how to do this job. And so for me, I utilized various methods to take notes, including something similar to Beth without the pictures, just note-taking and sending that email to them. But I worked on getting the teaching performance expectations on a kind of a checklist in an easy to do checklist on one side. And if you can put that up, Johnny, I apologize for the quality of this form. developed the form on a different computer that had it all on one page. And I believe that, oh, you did get the good one. Oh, good. Okay. And so I use it back to back. And so as I took the TPEs and kind of synthesized it because I was taking notes and going back to my big document of the TPEs to try to figure out and incorporate as I observed. And so that was really difficult for me. So as I'm observing student teachers, I use the checklist and document, just check off what I'm seeing, flip it over to the other side. If you scroll up, you'll see the evidence that I jot down. So I might put 1.2 and I'll jot down the evidence there, and then the comment why that works or how they could extend that. Towards the bottom of the forms, there's a little space for extra comments. On the front page, sometimes I will asterisk, if I don't check the box, I will asterisk the number and then write down where that was a missed opportunity. And then of course we take this and have our conversation after the observation and talk about, great things that we saw, and then maybe areas of growth for next time and goals for next time. I focus on a couple of TPEs at the beginning in the fall, more about the 1 and 2 classroom management and creating that great effective environment for students. And then of course, as the quarters go on, I focus more on the lesson planning and design and the assessment, although we look at the whole picture. But I really focus on making sure that management is in place at the beginning. I have not tried this, of course, with distance learning this year yet. I would hopefully be able to scan the form and or take a photo of it and send it to the student teachers and then have that discussion virtually. But it's something that for me helped me make sure that I included all the TPEs in one place without having to go to different places to try to incorporate it into my comments. What else was I going to say? It was very helpful at the end of the year for students when they worked on their induction plan, because they were based already, they had all the observations, at least for the column that talked about what did your supervisor say about your TPEs, that they could go in and actually pull the areas of growth or the areas that they excelled in. So not anything as deep and effective as what Johnny presented yesterday. I loved his presentation on those interactive journals, but for me, this worked last year, and I'm going to see if I can continue that this year, but maybe include some interactive journals as well, Johnny. So thank you for that.
Right. Thank you. Is Frank sharing as well? I want to make sure that we have everybody.
I had a long talk with my colleague Lily Chen Heftek in music education after our meetings yesterday, and we decided to go a little different. We wanted to give everyone just an overview of what we do in music education, because it's substantially different than most of the education programs. Maybe I can make this big. Okay. We are the only music teacher preparation program in our system, and it's different than other disciplines because what we deal with is doing and procedural knowledge. And our concern, however, is to get students to think in. And there's a lot of music teaching where people talk about music, but they don't actually get people to think in music. We have a real advantage in that we have 4 years with our students. It's a 4-year undergraduate program leading to a credential, and we're able to infuse equity and social justice themes throughout the program. However, university music education is very traditional, and we are fighting real problems in real racist attitudes. The Society for Music Theory last fall had a session with a gentleman in music theory talking about how racist music theory is, and this has finally hit the UCLA campus, and it's a big discussion going on. Okay, we all know the figures about diversity in our state, and we all know that with these tsunamis we're experiencing, there's all kinds of issues of supporting the students of color in our schools and getting our teachers to support students of color. American music education even at the K-12 level, however, it remains a white endeavor. We have large ensembles based on Western European models, orchestras, bands, choirs, and somehow or another, our music teacher preparation has to address these issues. Okay? So we're very lucky. We are able to attract and admit students of color. We aren't always successful because, again, our faculty listen for whiteness in auditions, but we get through it. And as the students go through our program, we encourage them to do presentations in world music at state conferences so they get familiar with other cultures and they get familiar with the idea of including other cultures of music and presenting this to their colleagues around the state. And again, these are based on Gay's concepts of culture responsive teaching, and we really work through all these with our students. And we've developed something called juxtapositional pedagogy, which tries to combine traditional innovative methodologies so that students have a place to, contrast the thoughts they come in with new thoughts and try them out. I, for example, would teach clarinet and guitar in the same class. This shocks them. They don't think that this is possible, but it is, okay? And it causes real transformation in our students. So we're trying to, through the way we teach, nurture dispositions of cultural responsive pedagogy. Okay? So regardless of how much social justice and diversity we want to introduce, the jobs our students go into are listed as ensemble teaching jobs. Okay? But we have to find ways to diversify what we do. So we get them to teach conventional classes. This is a beginning violin class. We get them to teach popular guitar. We get them to teach digital music making. So we try to look at new ways of teaching music. Okay? So we try to challenge student teachers to become more open and responsive to student cultures by juxtaposing these experiences. Our coursework requires that they examine their own identities and core values and look at how they change over the course of the student teaching year, which is the 4th year. And there's lots of readings and lots of self-reflective assignments. In student teaching, I use something called verbal protocol analysis of practice. And what it is a think aloud method of eliciting descriptions of cognitive and physical processes that this novice teacher is going through. What they do is we take videos of all their teaching, and 3 times a quarter I bring them back to campus. They watch their video, and we record what they're doing while they narrate their thinking processes during teaching. We transcribe these comments for analysis, and we look for themes in what they're doing. And this really facilitates a deep understanding of their teaching performance. And I just have a real quick example here. This is a student teaching, working with a beginning violin class, and this is about a minute of her work of class. And what you see on the right up here are her comments that she's made during the teaching process.
Really sweet because they're all excited about the bow, and they're are like, can we get the bow? Not yet, guys. It's okay. And I'm modeling what I want them to do right now. I'm holding my violin in resting position, and I'm waiting. There's a couple moments where I asked one of the kids who had his violin out, who was chatting, to kind of hold it, and I did that visually. And now I'm still just waiting. I'm reaffirming it verbally this time around because there were a couple kids in the back who just decided to talk. So, going into the ready position and making sure they have good posture.
Okay, so at this point of the quarter, she had learned how to monitor a class. She had learned how to make decisions in real time. We had worked very hard to get her to that point. For her to be able to wait 12 seconds for students to calm down is a major achievement in a music teacher's class setting. So this has become very effective for us to understand, to actually look at their thinking processes during the acts of teaching and be able to come up with descriptions of it. So I've tried to give you an overview of our program, trying to give you a little bit of how we work with student teachers in the field settings through video. Okay, and then of course what I have, all kinds of references on this stuff. Okay, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.
I'm gonna make a connection right away. I really appreciated that active rehearsal you did with your students. We have some of that in mathematics education as well. Having students go through and do the think aloud with peers about how their lessons are going to progress is such a powerful practice. I really appreciate that one. Right now, if people want to either ask questions in chat and I can call on you, or if anybody wants to just ask a question out loud right now for any of our presenters, that would be great. Or just an appreciation, a comment for them.
I have my hand raised, so I'll just.
I'm sorry, please go ahead, Molly. I'm sorry if I missed it.
That's okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Shaw from UC Santa Cruz, and I've been a classroom teacher for 20 years in a middle school, and I have 2 credentials, music and science, actually. So I just wanted to say hello to you, Frank, and my dream job is to be a middle school choir director. So seeing your photographs just has made my day today. So thank you. But my doctorate is in science education, and that's what I've been focused on. Anyway, I just want to, I don't have a question really, but I would like you, all of the presenters today, to hear my gratitude for the incredible supportive tone that you bring to your work. And as I listen to these presentations, I keep thinking, other university departments could learn so much, I think, for the way we talk about pre-service career people in our programs. I can't imagine a more supportive structure. So thank you all. And one last thing too, I'm absolutely grateful for all of our incoming student teachers for willing to take this plunge this year. I keep thanking them for hanging in there and being present. So thank you all.
Thank you, Molly. And I appreciate everyone reminding me to come back to Esther's questions. Are you okay with that, Esther?
Yeah.
I want to just respond to the first one, Esther. I'm going to bring it up later in my presentation with Jane Kim, just about thinking about student teaching as a lived experience, not just what they bring to it, but that they're living it in real time. And that it's the work that we're doing with them is not just the sum of a bunch of observations. There's a lot of stuff that goes along. They're having a life. They're working things out the entire time we're in our program, and we should think about that perspective of the development too. So I appreciate that question.
I'll just chime in. Beth, I know you mentioned, I think it was Beth or Trina, the autobiographies. I'm wondering how you use those autobiographies and if students really open up and use that opportunity to kind of share deeply about their experiences.
Well, but yeah, I find the autobiographies, they write them in the summer before we meet them, and they are shared with the RTs also. So they, I think they're super valuable. And when I read them, when I first read them, this was years ago when we first started doing this, my response was I wanted them to know my autobiography too. And so I shared with them, and now I share with them my autobiography, and that becomes so usually what I do is I read their autobiography, I respond to it in an email, and then I send them my autobiography, and then I say, I hope we can talk about this the next time we see each other. And I try and remind the RTs, usually the RTs get it right when school's starting and they're very busy. And so I try and ask them to read their autobiographies, if I reread them if they've read them a while ago. But one thing I wanted to say about supporting students of color, at UC Davis, we do have very few Black students in our program. So they're a micro minority, and it is deeply painful to see that. And so we have worked to try and find mentors within our local areas, other Black principals, Black teachers who would be willing to meet and discuss and talk about being a micro minority as an educator, and hopefully create a network of Black educators locally. So that's one very small thing we can do.
Zipping back to the overlap between what Esther was talking about and Beth in terms of the mental health of our student teachers, getting them to, join together. Mostly they meet each other in their classes they take, but the COVID situation made it really difficult and very isolating for our student teachers. I did create a couple of Zooms with all of my little cohort so they could talk to each other, but an ongoing, a chance for them to talk, share their experiences, their difficulties is really important and probably very important to keep in mind next semester when they're going to be once again in isolation.
Thank you for sharing that, Steve. That is such an important point, that they are much more isolated now. And one thing I want to point out at UC Irvine that we've been doing last year and now this coming year is putting students in groups in their schools. So we have multiple students at the same site, and I think a lot of them have regular meetings, and they have another mentor that oversees that group. And so we want to, as much as we can, mitigate that feeling that they're alone in this process.
I want to second one as well, Esther. We're working towards similar things, and it's interesting because this is a byproduct of COVID that maybe we should have been thinking about before. We often think about everything being in dyads. There's a supervisor and there's a student teacher, and we always think about that's the unit we should be thinking about. And we moved away from professional development schools, but what about putting knots of students together? And we're experimenting with this in our program about maybe some sharing across CTs and then some sharing across supervisors as well. What if we disentangle this one-on-one and make more of a family kind of approach to supervision? So I appreciate that.
Johnny, I'm just going to jump in too. First of all, this is just such a wonderful experience being able to hear about all the different UCs and what the programs look like, and kind of get a window into what others are doing. I'm certainly gaining a lot from the experience, but just wanted to add to it, at UCSB, we do kind of have that cohort model where I'm a supervisor at a site, or I cross over 2 sites, and we have one small group we meet with weekly, and they really become each other's support network through this. And especially when we transitioned to the remote structure, I noticed how much they were really latching on to one another for that support. So I started using Voxer, which is just a walkie-talkie app, and my whole group, I would send them little messages weekly, and they would kind of respond to one another and post pictures of things they were doing for self-care. So going for a hike, or even sitting with their dog, or whatever it was, but just really kind of as a check-in to see, once they were really isolated and feeling kind of alone, that we were still taking care of each other. And I think seeing the posts from one another maybe encourage them to do something for themselves too. So that was just another way for us to stay in touch and let each other know that we were still here. And we would also Zoom weekly to kind of just keep that conversation going. So I think those things really helped in this type of world that we're living in right now.
I would like to add, hi, my name is Eduardo Lopez, and I'm from UCLA. And I just want to go back to Esther's presentation. And also, like I mentioned, Rita's presentation. I think both of them are asking is that how are we intentional in supporting students of color? How are we developing racial literacy? And I think what I love about Esther's presentation is that she's intentional of for example, of this framework of saying, okay, if students are coming in, they're coming in with it. And so she's providing a space for students to name it, to acknowledge it and affirm it, that they're not alone, because oftentimes we carry this fear ourselves and we never are provided the structure and the space to talk about it, right? So if we create those spaces, not just optional, spaces, but structured into classrooms and in our practice with our students. I think that really is really critically important. And all the other spaces that are come with our current climate, I think that's what we should be doing. How do we create pieces, readings to cultivate intentionally these conversations?
I would imagine that a byproduct of imposter syndrome is the need to keep it a secret, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're making a wonderful point, and I can't wait to talk to my student teachers about imposter syndrome and start to understand that with them, and use my own history as a way of making sense of it for myself.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
about
please,
the imposter?
Sylvia.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So I'm with UC Davis, and I'm from a little agricultural community in the Salinas Valley called Soledad. And I know it's hard to believe, but in the city of Soledad, I was in the majority. So I'm half Filipino and I'm half Mexican. And I have to tell you that I never experienced the imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering if you think it's because I wasn't a minority when I was growing up. And when I went away to college, which was my first university was Fresno State, I don't know that I was much of a minority person there either. What affected me the most was this whole idea of affirmative action, which I had some issues about. And in my brain, I just thought, well, you know, they're lucky that I am qualified and I am good enough to be here. Anyway, so the question is, how do you think being from a town where you are not the minority affects the imposter syndrome?
Interesting question.
That's a great question. And I think it helps for a person who comes from somewhere where there are other people like me to not have feelings of imposter syndrome. But I want to add, not everyone goes through imposter syndrome feelings. I'm not saying everyone goes through this, and I'm not saying all of our student teachers are going to go through this, but it is much more prevalent when somebody is stepping into a new role, and more prevalent when they don't see good examples of what they value in that space. For example, the medical students, Asian American students in medical school felt less imposter syndrome because maybe they were more majority, and but then in the study of college students, they actually felt more than everybody else. So I think it really that keys to me that there is a difference of how prevalent the imposter syndrome is depending on what kind of space you're in. So then that tells me, how do we create spaces where our student teachers where they won't feel those feelings of being like an outsider or feeling no right to be there in that space or not qualified. Like I got here, it's interesting to me. I don't know why you brought up the affirmative action thing. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes, when I was going to college a million years ago, affirmative action was in place. And there were a lot of students who benefited from affirmative action. And frankly, I don't know if I did or didn't. But my mentality was that I absolutely was qualified.
Okay. Got it. I understand.
At the university.
Okay, but I want to think about that. Like, why do you even have to question yourself? Like, did I get here on my own merit, or did I get here because of affirmative action? Like, why? For me, that's problematic that you're even in that position that you have to question your own qualifications.
Oh, I wasn't questioning my qualifications. I was questioning their intent. I wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. Truthfully, there's not one place in this world that I don't belong. So, and I always felt that way. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but that's the way that I've always felt. So I was more questioning what their motivation was and what their intent was, not mine.
Okay. And that's wonderful. I love that you've never felt like that. And I wish I was like you too.
So I'm gonna pull this together because of time, and I apologize. I don't mean to cut anybody short. I'm just resonating with this right now because I'm working with beginning teachers in a summer session, and our topic of the day is stereotype threat. So appreciating the conversation we're having right now. We have just a couple minutes left. Just remember that there's a forum that you can make a comment about these sessions and appreciate these presenters. I've really got a lot of this session myself. Thank you all for bringing such good things to our peers. And I look forward to seeing you all a bit later as well. So I'm going to say thank you, and you all have a great next session.